You're listening to Sports Connections with David Smale, the show that brings you a fun and intimate look into connections throughout sports. Now here's your host, David Smale.
Lon Kruger was the first coach and still one of only 3 coaches to lead 5 different teams to the NCAA tournament. He also coached in the NBA with the New York Knicks as an assistant and the Atlanta Hawks as the head coach, but he's best known for his impact on college basketball. He was a 2-time Big 8 Player of the Year at Kansas State in the early 70s, and the Wildcats were the first team he took to the NCAA tournament as head coach. His 1988 team was one step short of the Final Four. He also took Florida, Illinois, UNLV, and Oklahoma to the tournament, taking Florida and Oklahoma to the Final Four. He's probably most proud of the fact that his son, Kevin, is the new head coach at UNLV. Lon, welcome to Sports Connections.
David, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, my pleasure for sure. I want to start with your playing days, Coach. You chose Kansas State over many other offers because you were allowed to play basketball and baseball. But I hear that your best sport in high school may have been football. Is that true? And just talk about your athleticism.
I was, our graduating class in high school was 35, and 18 of those were boys. So whatever sport was in season, we all played. So baseball, basketball, football, and we loved it. Had a great time. Had good high school coaches. Whatever season was in, we enjoyed it, and all the guys pretty much did it that way.
What was your best sport, though?
I grew up, probably enjoying and loving baseball more than anything else, largely because Dad was a baseball player and played a little semi-pro baseball back in the day, and he coached. I was the oldest of 6 children, so he always coached our little league teams, 5 boys, 1 girl. During the summertime, oftentimes three different teams. So he loved it, and the fondest memories are waiting in the front yard for him to get home from work so we could play catch.
Yeah,
and 4, 5, 6 years old, and we did that every day, and he enjoyed it. And Mom was great; she was always there for us. So had an unbelievable upbringing in terms of attention and time that the parents spend on all of their children.
Yeah. Now you played professionally in Israel. Is that correct? Professional baseball?
Actually, played professional baseball in the Cardinal organization.
Okay.
After college, drafted by the Cardinals, and played rookie ball and then A ball.
Okay.
In St. Petersburg with the Cardinals, and then actually at the end of that year, went over to Israel to play basketball.
Okay.
In December, and then didn't get back in time for spring training with the Cardinals, and they didn't call, so they weren't too hurt by it, I guess. So then turned our attention to basketball and coaching.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about your career. Is it true that you chose K-State because they were the only ones that allow you to play 2 sports, or did several schools offer that opportunity for you?
They weren't the only ones. They probably maybe zeroed in on it a little bit more than others. But quite frankly, it was 45 minutes down the road from Silver Lake. Always grew up both a KU and K-State fan when they played each other. I was a K-State fan, so kind of knew that if the option came down to that, it would be Kansas State. So it worked out well. Kind of that summer out of high school, was actually drafted by the Houston Astros in baseball, and Dad and their scout and myself went to a meeting, and they offered a little bit, but Dad thought, probably if they're not going to offer more than that, probably better off going to college, and certainly always going to, comply with his wishes at that point. And he always had our best interest in mind. So ended up going to Kansas State and playing basketball and baseball.
You and I have known each other for a long time. As you know, my very first book was on Kansas State basketball, and we'll get to that story in a little bit. But it was interesting that you were one of Jack Hartman's big recruits, and one of your very first recruits to K-State was a point guard named Steve Henson, who also competed in track and field besides basketball. How did your history with competing in multiple sports help you land Steve?
Well, we were Coach Hartman's first recruit. I don't know, not necessarily a big recruit, but because he had scholarships available and just had arrived at Kansas State as a head coach. And I think, quite frankly, Fred White, who was an announcer there in Topeka and certainly K-State play-by-play guy for a while. But at that point, I think he called Coach Hartman and Fred had called some of our high school games. And he said, hey, there's this kid at Silver Lake that you maybe want to reach out to. And Coach, again, just needing bodies at that point probably. So he called and it worked out that way. And then when Steve came along, certainly I've always encouraged, guys that are two-sport guys to do that in college if they have the opportunity. We did it as an undergrad, so it'd be a little hypocritical if I said no to anyone else that wanted to do that. So Steve knew that we had done it, and he knew that we were generally interested in him doing it as well.
And if I remember correctly, you allowed Steve Fritz, who was a Olympic caliber decathlete competing for K-State, you allowed him to play on your team as well. So it was actually, Steve may have been more focused on basketball, but also did track, where Steve Fritz was focused on track, but also was a pretty good ball player.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. We encouraged him to come out if he was interested because we knew how good of an athlete he was, good basketball player as well. So absolutely. Steve was a good contributor there for us as a Wildcat.
When did you figure out that you wanted to be a coach? Did you always know you wanted to be a coach whenever that playing career ended, or is that something that just kind of happened?
Quite honestly, it kind of happened. Never really thought too much about it. Growing up, I thought, just going to be a Major League Baseball player, like a lot of young guys in the 60s, thought that would be the route we took. And I thought that all the way through. And then coming out of college, played a little baseball, a little basketball. And then really when the playing days ended was the first time I thought, well, the next best thing is to coach. So we took that path. And fortunately, Bob Johnson, who was a K-State alum, was coaching at Pittsburgh State and allowed us to come down there as a GA and get our post-grad degree and then return to Coach Hartman at Kansas State as both a grad assistant and then full-time assistant. So the timing was right. Coach Johnson, Coach Hartman were kind enough to let us join their staffs and learn from them.
And then your first head coaching job was at Texas Pan American. Is that correct?
That is correct. Back in '82, President Nevades and Ricardo Hinojosa were kind of leading the search at Pan American. Today it's Rio Grande Valley, University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley. But then it was Pan American, and I was 29 years old at that point. So very fortunate to have that opportunity and kind of learn as we grew down there in the valley.
And then talk about coming back to K-State. How good was it to return to K-State as the head coach?
Well, it was fantastic, a great opportunity. And of course, Coach Hartman was retiring and had a lot to do with that. Naturally, Larry Travis was the athletic director and the opportunity to come back was 33, 34 years old at that point. So still really young in the coaching career and to go back to your alma mater at that point, just fantastic, and had a terrific 4 years in terms of experience. And Steve Henson, Mitch Richmond, a lot of really good players that allowed us to go to the tournament each of those 4 years.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, you were the first coach to take K-State to the tournament 4 consecutive years. Is that right?
I believe that is right. Of course, Steve Henson was the first player to do that because he came in as a freshman and went to the tournament each of his 4 years. So he was the first player in K-State history to do that.
One of my favorite memories of those years. I hadn't even started working on the book yet, but a friend of mine from the college that I worked at, Manhattan Christian College across the street, had student tickets. And he couldn't go on a particular night, and it was K-State against Oklahoma. Oklahoma came in ranked number 1. They had Stacey Augmon, they had Mookie Blaylock, they had Dave Seeger, a really good team. They were averaging 112 points a game, and you guys beat them. I guess I remember a little bit of it. You guys beat them 69-62. And the old configuration of Ahern Fieldhouse, the band sat in basically the end zone seats, lower level, right behind the goal. The student tickets were in the first row of the second level So basically 10 feet behind the band. And K-State was, I think you guys were down a little bit at halftime, came out strong in the second half. Dave Seeger came down. This was the first or second year of the 3-point shot. Came down, tried a 3-pointer, and because it was a long shot, the rebound was long. Steve grabbed the ball, kind of huddles down a little bit, holds his hand up to signal a timeout, and the refs called timeout. And that place was so loud. I knew the band was playing because I see the trombones going back and forth. I was right behind him and I couldn't hear them. And I thought, I've heard about the atmosphere. That was basically that told me, yes, everything I've heard is true. Just talk about playing and coaching in a Hearn Fieldhouse.
Absolutely, a great atmosphere. The player, you just couldn't help but get jacked up for each ball game. With the fans there, the crowd, the student section, the band, just a terrific atmosphere, and certainly the coach, the same thing. But Ahern Fieldhouse, was unbelievable. Great home court advantage. We had, I don't know if you recall, as a player, you wouldn't recall that perhaps, but we had that clock that was a little bit of a different type or style of clock that kind of had the bulb that would go around, and a lot of teams would, when it went under 1 minute, then the ball basically disappeared, and a lot of teams would think that at 1 minute mark the game was over, so they'd be taking shots. The home court advantage in a lot of different ways, but that clock kind of aided us on a few occasions as well.
Now, people change jobs for a lot of reasons. What would you say to K-State fans who might still hold a grudge that you left your alma mater? And by the way, I am not one of them. I understand different opportunities and all that. But what would you say to someone who says, Lonnie was one of us. He was one of our players. He was our coach. Why did he have to leave? What do you say to that person?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and one I really haven't been asked very much. But quite frankly, I mean, and I don't even know if I've ever said it before. I'd never lost a night's sleep, in coaching until some really tough losses at Kansas State. And and Barb and I talked about it. If I'm going to do this for long, I said, these losses at your alma mater are so devastating, and you feel like you're letting people down so much. And I hated that. I hated it. So probably very selfishly, I said, if I'm going to coach for very long, I probably can't be here, because it just felt like I was letting down all my fellow alums and everyone in the state of Kansas when we didn't win a ball game. So we did. We made a tough decision. We loved Kansas State, still do. And now in retirement, I can go back to being a full-time K-State fan and a K-State alum. But yeah, it was a tough decision. As I look back on it, I felt bad in some ways, but I knew that, it hurt so badly to lose and let those fellow Wildcats down that I knew I wouldn't have coached very long if I didn't move from Kansas State. So
that's interesting, Coach.
The first time I've ever said that.
Yeah, I'd heard all different kinds of theories about it, and I had never thought about the fact that, whoever's writing the check, you feel bad if you let them down, even though it may or may not be your fault that your team lost. I've become good friends with Bruce Weber, and he says, I stay awake at night wondering what I could have done differently, even though it may not be his fault. But you have all that you have at every other school, plus you're one of them. You're a fellow alum. So in a sense, you're letting yourself down. So I hadn't really thought about that, but that makes good sense. And it's harder. It's in some ways like Roy Williams, like Bob Huggins. It's better to coach at your alma mater, but in some ways it's harder, isn't it?
Yeah, no question. Again, like you say, I feel bad every time we lose at whatever school we're at, but it cuts a lot deeper. Yeah, when it's at your school and they're your peers as it relates to alums and fellow Wildcats. So that was a hard decision and one we really didn't voice too much at the time or ever at the time. But Barb and I just felt like if we're going to do this for long, we probably need to suck it up and go someplace else.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a really hard question, and you can be a politician and not answer it, or you can just, maybe now that you're retired, you can say it. Of all the stops you made, what was the best?
Well, certainly the alma mater, you go back there because it means so much. And I guess it was the best and the hardest, because of what we just talked about. Other than that, I mean, we've been very fortunate. None of the stops were painful or negative in any way. I mean, even in Atlanta, where with the Hawks, we got fired, in our third year, but we still good relationships, good people, humbled probably in a healthy way to be 50 years old plus and getting fired for the first time kind of gave me a little bit of a different perspective for others that lose their job. So they've all been good stops. Probably made the most relationship, friendships because of the age of Kevin and Angie when we were at Florida in Gainesville. They were in middle school, going into high school. And because of their activities at that age, with all the little league, all the cheer and dance and volleyball and everything that they're doing, you meet a lot of people through your children. So we probably had more friendships develop out of that stop than anywhere else. And again, it's a great college town, Gainesville. It's as is Illinois and all of them, with the exception of UNLV, is not necessarily a college type town,
right?
Because there's so many other things going on in Vegas. But all the stops have been good. They really were, and no regrets about any of them.
It's interesting. I don't know if you do this, but I like getting into can you top this discussions. Well, I know this person. Well, I know that person. And I always win when I pull out my phone and I show Coach Wooden's home phone number, which even though he's been gone for 12 years, I still have it in my phone. And I always win with that. But one of the people that I always mention is my friendship with you. And one of the things that I talk about, Coach, is the fact that other than K-State, it seemed like every stop you made, you were cleaning up a program. You were, I don't want to say the savior, but you were brought in because of your reputation of doing things the right way, winning, but not at all costs, winning with integrity, with class, and making the alums of that university feel good about their basketball program. Do you recognize that's a reputation that you have? And if so, how does that impact you?
No, I absolutely, I'm proud of that. Again, as a result of my upbringing, mom and dad, I mean, they were always about others. They were always about integrity. Dad always said, hey, there's no satisfaction in cheating and winning. Right. Anyone can do that. I mean, and if you cheat enough, you can probably win. And so, I mean, he drilled that into us from the very start. We never talked or used the word I growing up. And I think that is something that has stayed with us to this day. It's always we, it's always our program. It's always shared ownership, the integrity part of it. Absolutely. I'm proud of that. And I think maybe to your point, if I'm not mistaken, every program that we took over except K-State was on probation at the time we took it over, you know? And so, that was a challenge and kind of a intriguing challenge, if you will, and going in and I think, leaving each of those programs or developing that reputation of, we wanted to be the lowest maintenance program on campus. Our compliance people never had to worry about us. They never worry about us misusing funds, right. From a budget standpoint. They never had to worry about us academically because our guys were going to do the work to the best of their ability academically. Yeah. I think those things were important to us, because, if someone's going to hire you to do a job, then, they never had to look over their shoulder to wonder if we were doing it. And that made us feel good. And I think partly because, I think always felt like everything we did, we were representing our parents and people have gone before us. So, that was important to us. And we were proud of that.
And I want to take it one step further. Not only were you brought in to clean up the program, every program you left in better shape than when you got there. It's one thing to come in and say, okay, we're going to do things the right way or to have that reputation, but then to actually do it. And then when you went somewhere else, they're going, man, we're glad he was here. That's got to make you feel pretty good as well.
Well, it does. Yeah, we hoped that to be the case. I mean, that was what we were hired to do. Yeah. And again, like you say, we moved a few times, but we never thought about moving. We never applied for a job and actually moved for different reasons. On each time, it wasn't always just well, we're tired of this. It was always there was always something, whether it be getting back closer to home or getting away from home, I guess, as it was from K-State to Florida. Going to the NBA is a different challenge, intrigued us. Getting back into college at UNLV. So there's always some reason, not always the same one, but we never did really think about a next job ever.
Yeah.
In fact, when young coaches talk to me, I real strong about, don't worry about your next job. Just do the job you have as well as you possibly can, and everything else will fall into place. But yeah, it's interesting career for sure.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wasn't going to ask you what was the worst stop, but my next question is, what advice would you give people who are contemplating a job change? And you say, don't worry about the next job, think about this current job, but maybe it's time for them to move on. Maybe they're the ones looking, or maybe they're being pursued as you were in each of those cases. What advice would you give someone who's looking at a possible job change?
Everything relates to relationships. The people that are around you, the people that are in administrative roles. We've had terrific athletic directors at every stop that were just, again, they hired us to do a job and let us do that job. I think, again, they had, I think, generally the confidence that we were going to do it the right way, and they never had to worry about what was happening across campus with the basketball program. That was important to us. We felt responsibility to perform and with integrity and with the young people that are going to represent the program and our university and our community well. And you do that through having a terrific staff, assistant coaches, trainers, strength guys, all the way through it. Was always it's about people that you surround yourself with and people that you enjoy going to work with every day, and people that are going to represent well.
It's interesting. It's almost like you wrote the questions for me, which you didn't, by the way, because my next question is, as you know, Kenny Mossman and I have been friends for a long, long time, and you're our guest on Monday, and Kenny's our guest on Wednesday, and then Sherry Cole is our guest on Friday. So it's going to be OU week this week, but I asked Kenny what was so special about Oklahoma, and he said something that first of all, he gave a lot of credit to Joe Castiglione, the athletic director, but he said something along the lines of, it's not a stopover point, it's a destination. Oklahoma, maybe more than any other athletic department in the country, is a family. Do you think that's true?
Oh, I definitely believe that's true. I don't know about more than any other program, because I think there are a lot of programs that operate that way. But Joe Castiglione and President Harris are huge on the communication aspect of it. Looking out for each other, cheering for each other, relating to each other. It's a terrific feel. And not many coaches leave Oklahoma to take another job.
Yeah,
and I think that's historically the case, and understandably, OU from a resources standpoint, member of the Big 12, everything's in place. The best. I think academic support staff from a personnel standpoint and investment standpoint of anywhere in the country. I think they do a terrific job with regard to academic assistance in a very genuine way. And they do that across the board.
And the fan base, I've always said, I've been in the contiguous 48. I'm still working on Alaska and Hawaii, but I've been in all 48 states. And I think the friendliest people in the world, or at least in the 48 states I've been in, are in Oklahoma. You have an amazing fan base that gives you tremendous support, don't you?
Without question. When Barb and I came to Oklahoma 10 years ago, we immediately said, well, these are just like folks from Kansas, so we felt very much at home. And you're right, very friendly people, just as the people in Kansas are. But we grew up with that culture, with those type of people around us in Kansas. And when we moved into Oklahoma, we felt very much at home because the people were very much like the folks from Kansas.
I want to tell the story about how you and I first met. And even though I've said thank you face to face many times, I want to say thank you in this more public setting. Kenny and I were in graduate school together. We were taking a class. It was the history of journalism or something like that. And we sat next to each other, and I don't remember much about the class, but I remembered a lot of conversations with Kenny. And it was the last year of Ahern Fieldhouse. And one night we're sitting there, it was a Monday night class. And I said, what are you guys going to do to commemorate closing Ahern Fieldhouse? And he said, well, we're going to sell t-shirts. And I said, you got to do something more permanent than that. And he said, well, like what? And I said, well, release a book about the history of it. And he said, okay, you're a writer. Why don't you do it? And I said, Kenny, I've never written a book before. He goes, well, how hard can it be? It's just a series of stories. Come to my office tomorrow. And so I went to his office. He was a sports information director at the time. Went to his office and we chatted for a couple of minutes. And he says, all right, you ready to get this thing done? Sure. Picks up the phone and he calls you. And he says, Lon, I got somebody I want you to meet. All right, we'll be right there. Hangs up the phone, says, follow me. We walked into your office. And you and I had never met at that point, but you greeted me like an old friend. And Kenny said, Coach, I know you're busy. I want to introduce you to David. He has an idea about doing a book on the history of Ahern Fieldhouse. That's just like Kenny, even though it was his idea, to give me credit. And you said, well, is he the guy to do it? And he said, I think so. He said, all right, good. You picked up the phone. You called Steve Miller, the athletic director, and said, Steve, there's somebody I want you to meet. All right, we'll be right down. He goes, and then you said, follow me. We walked down the hall, walked into Steve's office. Steve, I know you're busy. I mean, it was almost scripted. I know you're busy, but Kenny and David want to have an idea that they want to share. David wants to do a book on the history of Ahern Fieldhouse. Steve says, what do you think? I think it's a good idea. He says, do you think he's the guy? Well, Kenny says he is. All right, good. We're done. That was our entire negotiation, counting the walking time, took about 5 minutes. So first of all, thank you, because it has started a career. I'm working on books 23 through 25 right now. I've released 22 of them. Still got to say my all-time favorite is The Ahern Tradition, which is about K-State basketball. I still remind my friends who follow the flaw and the caw down the river a little bit, that during that 38-year period from 1951 to 1988, K-State won more conference championships than anybody. So that's part of it that I enjoy, that rubbing that part in. But just, all right, so here, I guess I have to ask a question. What caused you to just say, okay, let's do it? So that makes, Coach, it makes no sense that this guy that Kenny knows walks in and you say, yeah, go ahead and do a project like this.
Well, number one, I felt so strongly about Ahern and the significance of that building to Kansas State folks and the history of their basketball program. And if Kenny says it's a good idea, we respected Kenny to the point where if you merge you as a passionate Wildcat and a good, really good writer with the story of Ahern, it's a good combination. So something that I think very much was appropriate to do that. And again, all the pieces aligned, and it worked out very well.
Yeah, it certainly worked out for me, sent my career in a totally different direction. And I do appreciate that. I want to go back to coaching. I think all coaches share two things. First of all, is a call to coach. If you are called to coach, just like if you're called to be a minister, if you're called to be a teacher, if you are called to coach, you have to coach. And the second thing that all coaches share is the same first name, Coach. I don't know how many of your former players call you Lon. They probably all call you Coach. Just talk about that calling. And obviously it's been your career for, I don't want to make you feel old, but close to 50 years.
Yeah, that's very true. And again, like we talked earlier, didn't really think about what we would do after the playing days ended. Coaching, like I said, seemed like the next best thing. If I love playing, then I'm going to love coaching. It's not quite as good as playing, yeah, but it's a close second, and really maybe even more so because you're able to enjoy the satisfaction, if you will, of the development of so many young people, the progress they make, the maturation that takes place in college between their 18th birthday and 22nd or 23rd birthday. So much changes in their lives, and the foundation that you're helping their families develop for each young man from which to live the rest of their life. because so much of that development occurs during those college years when a young guy moves away from home for the first time and he's surrounded by people that he's entrusted or his family has entrusted him to for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And it's just a very satisfying venture and profession, and couldn't be more excited about what we did. And again, not many people, and I almost embarrassed to say as I look back on it, I mean, just generally have no regrets about any part of it. And not many people can go through the life as blessed and fortunate as Barb and I have been, to be around good people, be in good spots, good places, great universities, and to have enjoyed every stop along the way.
I know you've built tons and tons of friendships. I know the coaching community, especially if you get as specific as college basketball coaches, I know that is a very tight-knit community. Let's talk about some of the relationships you have with other coaches who may still be active, maybe retired. Who are some of the highlights?
Well, of course, you get to know them all. Really through Final Four meetings, committee meetings, the competitions, of course. And we've been in a lot of different conferences, from the Southeast Conference, the Big Ten, to the Big 8, Big 12, Mountain West. You can go through, a lot of coaches through those stops. So, but there's so many, and there's so many great guys. And again, I'm so proud of what the coaches do in using their platform to generate dollars, generate awareness about whether it's the fight against cancer, or any number of other charitable organizations. Coaches really do a great job of giving back their time and their position to help others, and that's something that coaches throughout the country do on a regular basis.
One of my favorite Lon Kruger coaching moments was in 1988, the very last game in Hearn Fieldhouse, and you guys are playing Missouri. And legendary Mizzou coach Norm Stewart, who did have a reputation of being somewhat intimidating to the officials and maybe even the opposing coaches. And I don't remember the situation. It was late in the game, and you guys were ahead, not comfortably, but enough that, you weren't sweating bullets or anything like that. And there was a call that Norm didn't agree with, and he walked all the way to center court and started laying into the official. And I remember I was sitting up in the press box up in the rafters, and you got up from your seat and you walked right to the center court. And I don't know what you said, but it was basically, it looked like you said, "Sit down, Norm," which is obviously a famous KU chant. But I remember thinking, man, this guy's got some gumption. He's talking to Norm Stewart like that. Little did I know how close you and I would become. But I guess the question is, separate the competition, the heat of the competition, and the ability to go nose to nose with Norm Stewart and not back down, with friendships that you have long after the Final Horn.
I think it's pretty easy to separate the two. When you get into the game, when you get into the battle, you're thinking first and foremost about protecting your team and fighting for your team and doing whatever you have to do that. And some people are more obvious with that. Others are a little bit more subtle. We weren't ever screamers and yellers and body gestures with the officials, but we always felt like we got our points across in a quiet conversational type way. And Norm might have been a little bit more outgoing in his approach to it.
Might have been.
Might have been. But I can remember so many great battles between Coach Hartman and Coach Stewart from the playing days. Yeah. And how much Coach Hartman respected Coach Stewart and how much Coach Stewart respected Coach Hartman. And yet they battled like crazy. So I guess maybe learned a lot from that, in that, I don't have any enemies. I mean, there's no one in the coaching profession that I dislike. Yeah. I think some of them don't do it with great integrity. I don't agree with that part of it. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means the decisions they've made aren't decisions that I would agree with. But so there's no one that I dislike per se. So it's pretty easy to battle and then still, at the next conference meeting, go out and have lunch or whatever and talk basketball. I mean, coaches are great in sharing ideas and, what do you think about this when this happens? How do you cover it? no one's really inventing anything new.
Yeah.
It's all shared or borrowed or whatever. So, but Coach Stewart was great. And still to this day, we talk occasionally, and just so much respect for he and Virginia and all that they've done for the game of basketball and use their platform well.
I will tell you, maybe the only person more impressed with the way you handled that particular day than I was Norm Stewart. I remember talking to him after the game, and I asked him about that. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it was to the effect of, that kid's got something. I mean, it must be something to have him call you that kid, but he was really impressed with the way that you stood up to him and fought for your team. So that's got to make you feel pretty good.
It does, of course. And again, we played against his teams as a player when he was coaching in Missouri as a young coach back in the early 70s. And then the ability and the opportunity to coach against him as a head coach at Kansas State. And just a great respect for Coach Stewart and all the Missouri players at that time. Still talk to a few of those players that we played against in the early 70s from time to time. And that's one of the great things about coaching and collegiate basketball. You maintain those relationships. You talk occasionally, whether it be at the Final Four, or just, whether it be a holidays or, whatever the case might be, you maintain those relationships for a lifetime.
Yeah. Now, I asked you earlier your favorite stop, and you wouldn't give me an answer. But I can guarantee I know the answer to this next question. Who is your favorite active Division I men's basketball coach?
Well, that changed probably a couple months ago, when son Kevin got the job at UNLV. So very happy for him. And he's been around the game for a long time and played the game for 6 or 7 years after college. So got a little bit later start than I did because he had more of a professional career in basketball than I did. But there's a lot of good friends out there coaching other programs, and yet Kevin probably moved into that top slot certainly from my wife's perspective anyhow, and probably mine as well.
Well, I'm guessing, knowing moms and wives and stuff, that if Kevin had gotten that job before you retired, that if I asked Barb who her favorite was, it might be Kevin over Lon.
I think there's probably no doubt about that. We actually played when Kevin was an undergrad at Arizona State before he grad transferred to UNLV.
Yeah,
we were at UNLV, and we played Arizona State when he was a player there in the NIT, actually. And they came, and there was no doubt from anyone's perspective who Barb was cheering for that night, and it wasn't the Rebels on that occasion.
Yeah. Now, I've got a cousin who actually I had on the podcast recently, who is heavily involved in the bowling community, but he grew up, still lives in Las Vegas. He's in his late 50s. And I talked to him about he bowled at UNLV. And I just talked to him about things in general in Las Vegas. I said, by the way, I know your new head coach. I know he comes from good stock. And I couldn't even finish the question. He said, we are so excited. We loved Lon Kruger. We know what kind of a coach he was, and we're excited that Kevin's coming here and hope he has the same type of success. So, as a parent, I want to encourage you to know that Kevin is going to be very warmly received out there. So my last question is, will you be an advisor to Kevin beyond being dad? Do you expect any kind of a role with UNLV, or are you just going to be sitting up in the stands like Mick Cronin's dad was throughout the NCAA tournament this past year?
We won't be an advisor in an official capacity, but we'll talk basketball just like we have, every week of our lives. Kevin, we're talking to each other, 2 or 3 times a week about basketball or about recruiting or about something, and that will continue, but not from an advisory standpoint as much as just exchanging ideas, and we'll be involved in anything in the community of Las Vegas that we can to support the Rebels without question. But no, we'll be big time cheerleaders, big time fans. Barb and I will be at all the home games for sure, and cheering on the Rebels. No doubt about that.
Now, maybe you don't want to give this away. Will you guys be moving to Vegas? Or are you going to stay in Norman, or what's the family situation?
We'll be in Norman for a while, and
Okay.
Eventually we'll probably end up in Vegas. Just again, Kevin getting that job probably cemented that.
Yeah.
So we'll be moving to Vegas at some point. But we love what we have going here in Norman and in Oklahoma, and people are so kind and so great. No rush to get out of here by any means, but probably at some point when it all settles, we'll end up in Las Vegas.
And where is Angie these days?
Angie and her family are in Nashville.
Okay.
Yep. The first, I guess the second week of retirement, we had the opportunity to get to Vegas for 3 or 4 days and see Kevin and Allie and their baby. And then next 3 or 4 days, we went to Nashville and saw Angie and Mike and their 3 kids. So we got all the grandkids bases touched in a week's time. So felt pretty good about that.
Well, I don't know that Angie will remember me, but I'm guessing Kevin will, and definitely tell him I said hello, and Barb as well. I always like to ask people this wrap-up question, Coach. What is your legacy?
That's something you don't think about too much until people ask. And then, I think, it starts maybe most important, representing mom and dad well. I think that's huge, always motivating. Being a good husband to Barb, being a good parent to Kevin, Ange, and being good grandparents. Really, coaching basketball probably goes down the list.
Yeah.
Quite a ways. Quite frankly, we like the fact that we did that as a chosen profession for all of our lives, but and we like the relationships that developed from that. But representing with integrity and class and organization. I mean, all those things that related to family and friends and mentors, probably way more important than anything else.
All right. Well, Coach, it is always a pleasure. I don't know how many times we've said hi to each other at basketball games or at Big 12 Media Day or wherever. I obviously saw you quite a bit in Florida when you were there and at Oklahoma and stuff. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you very much for joining the podcast.
Thanks, David. My pleasure for sure.
Thanks for listening to Sports Connections with David Smale. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and rate the show from your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more about David Smale and his work by visiting davidsmalebooks.com. Don't forget to join us weekly for new episodes. Until next time.